Hey, sweet people, I forgot and took half of my teeth out. Guess which ones? Oh my gosh. Sorry, now I'm picking out popcorn. Which I do before I come on. But then they just, I don't know. We are reading this. Hey, junior squirrels, you sweet people, you, and any senior squirrels. GrannyDee's going to hold the book up like this. I'm sorry, y'all. Y'all know GrannyDee ain't right. Snowdrop and the Seven Little Dwarfs. Oh my gosh, it is going to sound bad. I thought it wouldn't be so bad. Once in the middle of the winter, when the flakes of snow were falling from the sky like feathers, a queen sat sewing at a window framed in ebony. As she was stitching, she accidentally pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell on the snow which had gathered on the windowsill. She thought to herself, "How I would love to have a daughter as white as snow, as red as blood, and with hair as red as blood." Have a daughter as white as snow. I believe maybe her hair. No, her hair's in. It says as red as blood. And with hair as black as this ebony window frame. Soon after this, her wish was granted. She had a little daughter as white as snow, as red as blood, and with hair as black as ebony. The little princess was called Snowdrop. In a short time, the queen died. After a year had passed, the king brought another queen to live with them in the palace. She was beautiful, but proud and vain. She could not bear to think that anyone could be as beautiful as she. She had a magic mirror, and whenever she stood in front of it, she asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" The mirror would always answer, "Thou, queen, art the fairest of all." Then she was satisfied, because she knew the mirror always told the truth. As Snowdrop grew older, she became more beautiful every day. She was as fair as a summer morning, and more lovely than the queen herself. One day, when the queen asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" the mirror answered, "Thou art fair, my queen, 'tis true, but Snowdrop is fairer than you." When the queen heard this answer, she turned yellow and green with envy. From that hour, she hated Snowdrop, and at last called a huntsman and commanded him to take the child into the forest and leave her there alone, thinking that in this way she would soon perish with the cold. The huntsman took Snowdrop into the forest, and his heart was sad as he left her. The poor child now wandered alone in the forest, but no harm came to her. The wild animals brushed by her, but did not touch her. She ran as long as her feet would carry her, and towards evening she came to a little cottage and went in to rest. Everything in the little house was tiny, but daintier and cleaner than words can tell. There was a little table spread with a white cloth on which were 7 little plates, 7 little spoons, 7 little knives and forks, and 7 little goblets. By the wall were 7 little beds, all in a row, each covered with a snowy sheet. Snowdrop was so hungry and thirsty that she ate a little porridge and bread from each plate, and from each goblet she drank a few drops of wine, as she did not want to eat and drink from one plate and goblet alone. As she was tired, she lay down on one of the little beds, but that did not fit her. It was too long. So she went to the next, but that was too short. She at last tried the seventh, which was just right, and after saying her prayer, she dropped off to sleep. So this is like Snow White, but it's also like Goldilocks a little bit, isn't it? When it was quite dark, the masters of the cottage came home. They were 7 little dwarfs who dug in the mountains for gold. As soon as they had lit their 7 little candles, they knew at once that someone had been in the cottage, because things were not just as they had left them. "Who's been sitting on my little stool?" said the first. "Who's been eating my little... Who's been eating from my little plate?" asked the second. "Who's been eating my little loaf?" said the third. "Who's been tasting my meat?" said the fourth. "And who's been using my little fork?" said the fifth. "Who has been cutting with my little knife?" said the sixth. "Who has been drinking out of my little goblet?" said the seventh. Then the first looked around the room and saw a little hollow place in his bed. He said, "Who has been lying in my little bed?" Then all the other little dwarfs ran to their beds and cried, "Why, someone has been sleeping in ours as well." The seventh, when he looked at his bed, saw Snowdrop lying there asleep. He called to the others, who crowded around to look, holding their candles high so the light shone on the child's face. "Bless us," they cried, "what a beautiful child." They were so delighted that they did not awaken her, but let her sleep in the little bed. The 7th little dwarf slept 1 hour in each of his companions' beds, and thus passed the night. As soon as the morning dawned, Snowdrop awoke. When she saw the 7 dwarfs, she was frightened, but they asked her kindly, "What is your name?" "I'm Snowdrop," she answered. "How did you come to our house?" they asked again. She told them how the cruel queen had given orders to leave her in the forest to perish, and how she had walked all day and at last come safely to their cottage. "Will you take care of our little cottage?" asked the dwarfs. "Cook for us, make the beds, wash and sew and knit? If you would do this and keep everything clean and neat, you may stay with us, and you shall want for nothing." "Yes," said Snowdrop, "I would be very pleased to." So she stayed with the dwarfs and kept the house in order. In the morning, the dwarfs went into the mountains to dig for gold and ore. When they came back in the evening, she had their supper ready. All during the day, Snowdrop was alone. So the kind dwarfs warned her, "Watch out for the wicked queen. She will soon know that you are here. Open the door to no one." The queen, thinking that Snowdrop had surely died in the forest and that now she was the most beautiful woman in the world, stood in front of the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror answered, "You are fair, my queen, 'tis true, but Snowdrop is fairer far than you. Snowdrop, who dwells with the 7 little men, is as fair as you, and as fair again." When the queen heard these words, she was greatly troubled, for she knew that the mirror always told the truth. She knew that in some way Snowdrop had been saved and was still living. She thought and thought for a way to destroy Snowdrop. As long as she was not the most beautiful woman in the world, she would not be at peace. "Nevertheless," said she, "I will find some way of putting an end to her." So she brewed a deadly poison and soaked a comb in it. Then she disguised herself as an old woman and made her way over the mountains to the house of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door and called out, "Fine goods for sale, pretty trinkets for sale." "I am sorry," said Snowdrop, "but I must let no one in." "Oh, but it will do no harm just to look at my wares," said the old woman, and she drew out the comb and held it up for Snowdrop to see. The child was so pleased with its beauty that she forgot to be cautious and opened the door. So it's not an apple, is it? When she brought the comb, when she had bought the comb, the old woman said, "I will arrange your hair properly for you now." Snowdrop, without thinking, allowed the woman to comb her hair. She had hardly placed the comb in her hair when the poison began to work, and Snowdrop fell down senseless. Fortunately, it was growing dark, and soon the little dwarfs came home. Finding Snowdrop on the floor, they knew at once that the wicked queen had been there. They soon discovered the comb and removed it from her hair. And by this kind of comb, they're talking about an ornamental comb that you stick in your hair, not one that you just comb your hair with. I've got this part going on here today. Removed it from her hair. Snowdrop quickly opened her eyes again and told them about the peddler. They again told her to be very careful not to open the door for strangers. When the queen reached the palace, she went at once to her mirror. Standing in front of it, she asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" The queen answered, "You are fair, my queen, 'tis true. But Snowdrop is fairer far than you. Snowdrop, who dwells with the 7 little men, is as fair as you, and as fair again." Hearing the mirror speak thus, she trembled with rage. "Snowdrop shall die," she said, "even though it cost me my own life." She went up to a secret chamber into which nobody else had ever entered. Then she carefully prepared a poisonous apple. Here comes the apple. Outwardly it was very pretty, half rosy and half pale green. Whoever looked at it could not be but tempted by it, but to eat it would mean certain death. She stained her face and dressed herself as a peasant woman and crossed the mountain to the cottage of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door, but little Snowdrop put her head out of the window and said, "I'm not allowed to let anyone in. The 7 little dwarfs have forbidden me to." "Well, it doesn't matter to me," said the peasant woman. "I only want to sell my apples. There, I will give you one." "No," said Snowdrop, "I must not take any presents." "What, are you afraid of poison?" replied the peasant woman. "Look here, I will cut the apple in 2. You can have the rosy half, and I will eat the green half." The apple had been so carefully prepared that it was only the rosy part that was poisonous. When Snowdrop saw the woman eating part of it herself, she could no longer resist it, so she put out her hand and took the rosy half. But with the first bite, she fell, as if dead, to the floor. The queen looked at her with cruel eyes and laughed out loud. "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony," she cried. "The dwarfs won't be able to wake you up this time." That night, when she asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" the mirror at last gave her the answer she wished. "Thou, queen, art the fairest one of all." Then her jealous heart had as much peace as a jealous heart ever can have. When the dwarfs returned to their cottage that evening, they found Snowdrop lifeless on the floor. They lifted her up, they undid her bodice, they combed her hair, bathed her face in water, but all in vain. The beloved child was dead, and dead she remained. They laid her on a couch and all sat around mourning for her. For 3 days they wept. Then they would have buried her, but she looked so fresh and rosy that they said, "We cannot lower her thus into the earth." So they had a case made of crystal clear glass, so that on all sides they could see into it. They laid her inside, and on the top they wrote, "Snowdrop," and after it, "Princess." Then they placed it on top of a high mountain, and one of them always stood watching over it. The birds, too, came to mourn over little Snowdrop, first an owl, then a raven, and last a dove. For a long, long time, Snowdrop lay in her crystal case, but she always looked as if she were asleep. for she was still as white as snow and as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. One day it came to pass that a king's son, who had wandered all day in the wood, came to the dwarf's cottage to spend the night. From there he went up to the mountain top and saw the beautiful maiden in the crystal case. He read the inscription that was traced on it in gold. "Let me have this case," he said to the dwarfs. "I will give you whatever you ask for it." "No," answered the dwarfs, "we would not part with it for all the gold in the world." "Then give it to me as a present," he said, "for I cannot live without it. I shall guard it and keep it as my dearest treasure." When the good little dwarfs heard the king's son speak in this manner, they took pity on him and gave him the crystal case. The prince then commanded his servants to carry it away. Going down the mountains, they stumbled over a low bush. The shock caused the piece of poisonous apple to fall out of Snowdrop's mouth. A moment later, she opened her eyes, pushed up the lid of the crystal case, and sat up, restored to life. "Oh," she cried, "where am I?" "You are with me," said the king's son joyfully. Then he told her all that had happened to her and said, "I love you better than anything else in the world. Come with me to my father's castle and be my wife." Snowdrop felt kindly toward him and went with him to his palace. There they were well received by the king and soon were married amidst great pomp and splendor. It happened that the wicked queen was invited to the wedding. Just as she was ready to start, she stood in front of the mirror once more and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" The mirror answered, "You are fair, my queen, 'tis true, but the prince's bride is fairer far than you." Then the queen was very angry. At first she thought she would not attend the wedding, but then she knew she would have no rest until she saw the young queen. When she entered the banquet room and saw that the bride was none other than Snowdrop, her rage was so great that she fell to the floor and never opened her eyes again. So she passed away, And Snowdrop lived in peace and happiness forever after. The end. I love you, my little junior squirrels. Mwah. Granny has to hide. I look crazy without my teeth. I'm so crazy. I forgot. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. See you tomorrow with all my teeth in. Bye-bye.